this last week, I wanted to answer the question or give you some insights about why me, right? A lot of people always ask me, why did I get these symptoms? Right? I actually have clients that I'd be like, I prefer to have their symptoms. I don't want, I prefer to have diabetes into this. Why do I have this? Right? This is too, debilitating. Diabetes, I just have to figure out, food wise, but no one can see it. Um, and, they ask, why not my siblings? They went through the same, parental styles, or my colleagues. They went through hell with me at my job at that time. So I wanted to start with that. Then review how to read and apply German New Medicine, really look at what we've looked at. We're going to have actually someone come in to show you how he's applying it so you can see it in action. And then in the second half of class, we're really going to look at the topic and continue the topic that we started last week on progression, right? On progression and why do symptoms keep, coming in and out, in and out, in and out, right? What's going on, with Danny? What's going on that I tingle in class, right? And then what's going on that it stops and then I tingle when this happens, right? What is that? What does that mean? So to start today, I wanted to give you guys a story. So we're going to talk to about four different people. These are four different people. All together, they're going through a month from hell at work. Their company has a new owner and has been firing people and requiring all those that still have a job to take up the slack. The hours are becoming grueling. And yet these four people have been in this company for over a decade. And how this new management, this new owner is doing everything has completely caught them by surprise, right? Remember, caught you by surprise, wrong foot. That's that conflict shock, right? So they're all in a shock about what's happening at work. So one of them develops a severe gastric issue. Why? Because he's angry around how he's being treated and his team is being treated. He thinks this is a shitty situation that they're being put through after years of loyalty. And how could they be treated this way? After a few months of this crap, he develops colitis. Another one, this is a woman. She's a young woman of the four. She felt lost, for this job was her identity. What was she going to do with her life now? This job is who she is, and she felt powerless to do anything. So she has actually become extremely depressed. She can't even get herself to go to work, and she's soon laid off. Another one, this third one, oh, she ain't going to quit. She's going to show them that she's worthy and worthy to be kept on. So she's working even more hours, and she takes on even more slack than any of her colleagues. It is grueling, but she's not going to give in. She works for almost 12 months in this situation, longer than many of her colleagues. And after those 12 months, she starts noticing that her foot is starting to drag. When it continued to get worse, she went to her doctor
Oh my God.
and she got diagnosed with MS. The fourth person of these four that worked together at this job said, screw this. This treatment stinks. Life is too short. Even if I am already 40 years old, I'm going to go work for another company. He doesn't care if it pays less. He's like, I'm out of here. He wasn't ready to take on the insane demands of this new ownership, even if he'd been there for 10 years. So he quits. He has experience. He's worked in other places before. He knows he can find another job. So he promptly, sets his day that this is the day he's going to quit. He finds a job almost immediately. The day after he leaves this job, he gets a cold. He gets a flu, actually, and spends almost a week in bed. So he has to delay when he starts in his new job. But then he starts the job, he's recovered, and he goes on with his life. That's it. So, what causes these four people to respond differently to the same situation and their bodies to make such different adaptations? Any ideas? Why do they respond so differently? Same situation. Agota says personality. Yeah. What else?
The approach that every person took the situation with.
Yeah, the approach and what influenced that approach?
Mhm.
Growing up, growing up family model.
Yes, that's one, definitely. Family model is a big one. How you perceive and your perception is influenced by what? Growing up, what else? Your
Is it
past, maybe.
genes?
Ah,
Past? But
it I
genes, do they
genes,
have
I
to
would
do
say, yeah, it could be character, right? Different people have different
character?
character. Even like, if you have babies, if you have kids, yes, they might all have certain traits, but they kind of have different characters, even with the influence of family, right? So family can influence, but so can your character, right? My sister and I are extremely different. We always ask, well, how do you see this? Well, how do you see this? Because it's so different. It's kind of, wild what she focuses on and what I focus on.
Yeah, so ever since I was diagnosed and my whole journey, I've been learning to be a little bit more conscious and know that if I take this the wrong way and I let it bug me the whole day, I'm gonna be crunching, and getting stressed out and putting my body through something that's not needed. I mean, it's not the end of whatever happened, it's not the end of the world.
Not the
I
end of
can
the
solve
world.
it,
Exactly.
let it go.
Exactly. But when you do think that's the end of the world, which is the what I was talking about before, German New Medicine is based on biology. But as humans, we'll interpret someone rejecting you as the end of the world. And the body will respond as if it is the literal end of the world, right? So, yes, our childhood experiences, our family, our upbringing, our character, our personality, and our experiences, right? The difference between the woman that was depressed is this is practically her first job. And the guy who just took off is he's had plenty of jobs. He knows this sucks, this stinks. That's why he got a flu, because it's a stink conflict. But he quickly pivoted and went to do something else. So it was only a minor 5 days of being with the flu.
He
Those
values,
experiences.
he values himself.
It could, yes, he does value himself. So he didn't take it personally, right?
Exactly.
And
Mhm.
that is a big one. When we take something personally, it's like, oh, it guts us. And if it guts us, our bodies are like, ah, right? We're being attacked here.
Does this mean that people who takes personally things are sick, my psychology, like crazy sick, like meaning that because what it's I don't understand why taking it personally is bad. You hurt me, and yeah, I'm taking it personally. Personally, I'm hurt. Like this makes me like not a normal human being
Oh no,
taking stuffs personally.
it makes you very much a human being, but it
Okay.
also makes your body react to it, which is
Yeah.
okay. Once you realize, oh my gosh, I've taken this personally and I've been like for 5 days, do something about it, right? Why do I think this person is so important? Why did I put him on a pedestal? Why does his opinion, right? To work through it. Because the goal in the work that, I do is really to realize that's them and this is me, right? The more you can establish that, the less other people, because mostly, sorry to say, most people are projecting all of their stuff to you, right? It's like, they're not really looking at you. They're looking at what you're doing is causing something in them to get disturbed. And so they're trying to like, push you down so that they don't feel bad. But it's about their stuff, right? So it's sometimes nice to go, oh, you know, they're saying I did it wrong. They're probably saying that to themselves 10 times worse, right? I always say the people that judge is the people that judge themselves the most. So it's getting some skills that we didn't learn as kids. And as you saw these four, everyone has their Achilles, right? Everyone has that area that they're going to get caught in, right? They're going to have, it's like tendencies. If you want to please everybody, and at the same time, you really do want to do what you want to do, you want freedom, trying to please and trying to be free is called a double bind. It's almost impossible, and it will create stuck situations. And stuck situations will create motor conflicts, right? Rigidity, like we saw that in Paula, right? Yeah, that video. So think about this. For example, the first person, the one with the colitis, ended up with colitis. He's disgusted by the whole situation. Listen to these words because it's almost like sometimes I had one of my teachers say, after a while, you can hear people's conflicts in how they speak. You know, oh, this person probably has colitis, or colitis is something that they might go in and out of life because he's disgusted. Think about food, our bodies treat everything we take in. We call it a morsel in German New Medicine. Be it food, be it a new project, or be it words of affirmation, we take it in, we digest it. And so for him, he's reacting to what just happened in disgust, right? He feels like he's been screwed. Maybe it reminds him of how his mother would throw away his old toys without asking him, right? Or always take the side of his younger brother and never him, right? So his body is trying to build a stronger colon, a stronger lining of the colon, so he can better dispose and get rid of shitty situations. Because his whole thing is about who's screwing me over, who's manipulating me, and that's all going to show up in the colon. Issues with the big intestines. The second one, in her case, it's depression. Depression occurs when the body says, you know what, a physical adaptation is not enough because she's getting hit from both sides. And so it will do a mental adaptation to help you. So in her case, if she's depressed, it's because there's a conflict of identity, right? She thinks her job is her identity because she's only had this job, right? And at the same time, she can't come to terms with it. Again, she can't digest this. It's like, I can't deal with this. I can't. So she's having two things going on at the same time. And so her body's actually intentionally depressing her so that she will hunker down and wait for the problem to pass over her. It's like, can't do anything, being hit left and right, so I'm just going to hunker down. And a lot of people, when they first get diagnosed, will go through a depression because it's like, I'm being told this and I'm being told there's nothing I can do. So I feel powerless and I feel my identity is changing. And so there can be a time of depression because the body's like, okay, let's ride this one out for a little while, right? The third one, the one that's not quitting, the one that's going to keep going, the one that's going to keep proving, she has a history of taking care of everything since childhood. Maybe she's the oldest sister, right? Or maybe she has a mother that had gone, had psychological, moments or was sick herself. So she's used to, I'll take care of it all. So here's another situation. Everybody's whining and she's like, I'll take care of it. I'll take more work than everybody else. I can do this, right? And so she has that going on. And at the same time, she has a fear of being perceived as a failure. Perhaps in her childhood, there's very little praise. And at the same time, failure is taboo in her childhood, right? You don't want to fail. Maybe your uncle failed, or, there's something about failure that was like, ooh, no bueno, right? And so it never occurred to her to quit this job. I know this because this was one of my first clients diagnosed with MS when I first started working. And I thought, wow, what is this? What has to be there? What is that personality, right? And we really explored her childhood to find out why did it never even occur to her? It just was not on her radar to quit, to go, this stinks, or this is disgusting, and just walk away. Never occurred to her. She just hunkered down, pushed, put her heels in, and kept going. And the fourth one that just promptly got up and quit, well, he has life experience. He has life experience. A job for him is just a job. He has a big group of male friends who do sports every weekend. That's more his identity. This is just pays the bills. So as we said, he's not taking it personally. And he has experience in this. He knows companies do this. It's probably not the first time the company changed, ownership and everything got screwed up. And so he's just like, oh, know what this is about. And he jumped ship quite quickly and just came away with a flu. Does this make sense why each of them developed what they did and reacted in the way they did?
Yes.
Does this make sense? Maybe why your sister reacts or your sibling reacts different than you. And it's like, why did I get this when my sibling and I both were raised the same? Okay. Why do symptoms continue? So I'm going to give you guys a story of actually a colleague of mine, an NLP colleague, who had the same issue, the dragging foot, the dropped foot. I called him because I'd heard he'd had some health issues. And I knew him for quite some time. He'd been married for about 20 something years. They had divorced amicably. He got along with his ex-wife. They had 2 kids. But he soon met this French woman, this beautiful, gorgeous goddess. And in less than 2 years, they were married. Everybody around him said, "Oh, you shouldn't do that. Da, 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 you never know. You're not in the place yet to marry, but he married. After a couple years, he realized she was Cruella de Vil, right? She was scary. And she was scary for him, and she was scary for his kids. And he was in a dilemma because he knew he needed to leave her. But at the same time, if he did, he would be that guy who was, divorced twice, right? And he would be the guy that everybody was correct. You're correct. I shouldn't have married so quickly. You're correct. You don't know enough about her. So he was like, oh my God, I can't do this. It was a failure thing. How my God. He wasn't moving forward in the direction he knew he had to. He said, Emma, he goes, I got to tell you this. I got to tell you this. So he starts telling me this story and he goes, Emma, one day I start noticing my foot is dragging. This is an NLP practitioner like myself. And he's like, my body was telling me something. And so promptly he told her, this is it. I need to get a divorce. He swallowed he was like, I got to deal with this. He got a divorce. He split everything. He said goodbye, never talked to her again. He dealt with the Facebook going, yeah, there we are. He's dealt with what he knew was going to happen, people's reactions, moved on with his life, no more drop foot. Now, on the contrary, what happened to my client after that job, after she got fired after 12 months, that started her symptoms, what allowed those symptoms to continue, to keep coming back, to progress for the next 40 years, was that there was no significant change. She blamed the job, but she made no change. And the thing is, she continued to use the same attitudes and emotions anytime she was under pressure. And that is, she continued to, dig in her heels, to push, to ignore her needs. And every time she did that, her body was reminded of those 12 months of hell. And so every time she pushed, every time she ignored herself, every time she had the same emotion, oh my God, I have to do this. I don't know, I can't quit this. I can't, no, I'm not going to be perceived right. Every single time she had the same emotional theme, her body responded again in the same ways it had done at the end of that job, over and over and over and over. It was like a faucet just dripping, right? That's what caused her symptoms to continue, to go from a little drop foot to her entire leg to getting a very rigid leg because she was doing the same thing. I kind of, for me, this is kind of like your body has PTSD. Yes, Angelica. Yep, that's why I called him. So I was like, you had a heart attack. Woo, what was going on in your territory? You know, and then he says, oh, that's nothing. I mean, that's big, but yeah, I know you do MS, so let me tell you about this other symptom. Yeah, Angelica said on the chat, because this was a colleague who also had a heart attack, because it's a resolution of a big, big territory issue. But he was like, oh, don't worry about the heart attack. Look what happened here. You're going to love this piece. So for me, the reason why symptoms continue is like your body has PTSD. Your body is like, oh my gosh, that happened. And I need to make sure it can't happen again. And what's the way to make sure? It's going to be trigger happy. The minute it smells that previous kind of event, same emotion, same behavior, sometimes the same person, the symptom is going to get there. The body's going to do the adaptation. I like to think about, like, you know, you hear this all the time. If a war veteran comes back from Vietnam or comes back from now, you know, Iraq, etc., it's like like The Diplomat. I was watching this series, and so a guy had come back from war, and it's like they were going to have firecrackers. Are firecrackers, like, you know, dangerous? What do they remind him of? Right? So he was like, I can't, even knowing it's only a firecracker, my body goes into that tense panic mode of when he was in the war. That's what your body is doing. So even though this client and yourselves, before this year from hell, use this mode of operating, pushing and proving yourself, digging your heels. She used that her whole life. She's like, why does it now have to be an issue? And I said, because of that experience. Your body now has PTSD. And so anything that smells the same, it's going to react. So there needs to be, your body needs to learn that it's not an issue anymore. In German New Medicine, we call these retriggering elements, you know, emotions, behaviors, similar situations, tracks. It's like you step on that old track and then your body goes, oh, here we go, right? And you got to pull yourself back. Before we continue, I wanted to introduce to you someone because he's currently working on a symptom. And he's doing this work of seeing day to day, what are my tracks? What is, you know, what causes the body to go, oh, this reminds me, boom, and starts the symptom. And then looking at where did it start, you know, and then looking at where's in my childhood or my previous experiences or my characteristics, my personality that's causing this to happen to me. So, Gavin,
Yeah,
welcome.
thank you.
Yeah, so we were just talking about this a little bit last week, and I was like, oh, this is a great example, right? It's like you're in the midst of it, you're piecing together all the pieces and you're playing with it. You're like, ooh, because the thing is to stop having a symptom, you can work on a whole bunch of different places, right? And so I'd love for Gavin to kind of describe how he's working through his symptom.
Okay. It's a bit like playing detective. And it's somebody said to me a while ago, and there was an interview on the radio that life is lived forward and understood backwards. And it was a bit like that that sort of resonated with me. That you sort of were charging ahead and charging ahead the whole time. And then suddenly for me, it's bladder and it's, oh Christ, I need to pee. And I don't understand where that's come from. And then when you actually analyze it and you look back and think, oh, that's what it was. But I can, for everybody that's sort of going through and trying to trace symptoms, it's not always easy. I've gone down a lot of rabbit holes and I've had a lot of false hypotheses that actually I sort of, is it this? Is it this? Is it this? No, it isn't. But actually it was staying really tightly to the symptoms and actually understanding some, for me, the biology of actually what's happening with my body. And so for bladder issues, German New Medicine says that it's a territorial conflict, which with over I've been learning about territorial conflict can be that somebody's invaded my space, somebody's taken over my job, somebody's taken over my role. It can be, it doesn't have to actually be that physical invasion of space. And so we looked at somebody who I was growing up, a friend of my parents. I'm gay, and she was asking questions about girlfriends that was feeling really quite uncomfortable. And so I ended up having to go and say, look, sorry, I just need to actually get out and go for a pee. So I was sort of thinking, okay, is that my territory? And this has been a sort of detective program that's been going on for quite a long time. And in parallel with this, I've been doing a lot of other work to actually understand what my childhood triggers are and where the issues of growing up, my sort of missing chunks of childhood development, and everything for me boils down to needing my mother's love from when I was a tiny baby. And it was my perception of what I needed rather than whether actually it was given or not. And so there were steps of my childhood development that didn't complete properly. And so I knew this was always sort of knocking around this, um, everything revolved around if I don't do this, I won't be loved. And so every step I took had to get that love, that external validation from my mum, and also now that validation as part of my life. And that's one of the things I've been working on. And I sort of think, oh well, it's got to be something to do with that. But I couldn't quite piece it together. And so, as I said, lots and lots of little sort of bits of the jigsaw, all sort of jumbled up. And one morning, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, it was glorious sort of summer morning. For some reason, we woke up early, and it was about sort of 5 o'clock. So it was Saturday morning. There wasn't much happening, and so put the radio on, and I was just making a few sort of notes as to what I'd experienced with my bladder, just sort of trying out different hypotheses. And I sat really still in bed, with nothing happening around me at all. And then I suddenly thought, oh my God, I need to pee. And there was that urge. And so I sort of ignored it and sort of carried on with what I was doing and making a couple of notes. And I was sort of thinking, oh, this is really irritating. And then the urge came again. And I tried to suppress it. And in the end, I ended up getting up, going to the bathroom. But as I was in the bathroom, I was thinking, okay, so nothing had changed in that situation. The whole room was silent. What had happened that made that difference? So that if following the German New Medicine model, that there was a trigger that then led to the consequence, which is urination, to mark my territory. What was my territory and what was actually happening? Now, this is in a silent room, me propped up in bed, my husband asleep next to me. The radio was on quietly. And I'd realised that actually the shipping forecast had come on, which, if you're from Britain, you'll probably know it's a sort of fairly, well, I find it quite lyrical, sort of meteorological forecast. And I suddenly thought, oh, I wonder what that was about. And then 5 minutes later, I was tapping away on my notes, and there was just a little interruption, and suddenly I had that urge again. And so I sort of pushed away the interruption. I sort of thought, okay, so what just happened there? And I realized that actually a thought had just crossed my mind about maybe it's time to go down and put the kettle on. And it was a totally inconsequential thought. And so I did nothing about it. And then the urge started again. And so I was able to just sort of change my thinking. And so this series of little distractions kept coming in. And every time this urge to pee came on, I was asking and saying, okay, so what's happening just before it? And it was much more, so my leg moved or something like that. It was much more actually what's going on in my body rather than what I was thinking. Because German medicine is all about, and our emotions are all in our body. And it was lots and lots of little shoulds that I was living out. So in my mind, I was expecting that I would have to get up and go downstairs and make tea. I was expecting the shipping forecast was when I was growing up. It was always that sign that we needed to get outside and start doing stuff on the farm. And so each of these I realized was an interruption of, I called them my shoulds, these sense of obligations. And eventually it sort of started to dawn on me. I'm thinking, well, maybe this is actually an intrusion on my personal time, my personal space. That with all of these shoulds, this was my leisure time. I was actually relaxed in bed. It was early in the morning. And there was a constant sort of, and then the cat came in and started meowing and wanting his breakfast. And nothing, it seemed, the universe was quite intent on not allowing me to sort of lie down and relax. And so each of these was a sort of a minor trigger. And I've sort of been playing with that idea for a bit. And so whenever I got the urge, I could be sat at my desk later in the day. Whenever I got the urge, I was thinking, okay, so what just happened just before it? And I'd say 99% of the time, it was actually something physical. There would be a noise, exactly as you were saying, this track, that was reminding me of a previous situation of an I should. And it seemed to me that actually this territory that I was fighting for was actually my personal space, my time, and that was being encroached on by the I shoulds. And the I shoulds have all come about because somebody with MS, I should be doing this. I get my validation from doing, and I'll eventually get my maternal love through saying at the end of the day, I've done all of these things, which is why those I shoulds are so powerful. But they were crowding out my personal time. And so that was one of the sort of the mechanisms going on. And if I can sort of term it crudely, those were sort of little we's of that small territory marking that I needed to do just to be able to sort of say, okay, that's I've reestablished my personal time, my territory. And then there were the oh my bloody hell, God, crisis times when actually a little wee wasn't enough, and it becomes then a massive flow of incontinence, and then it's deeply shaming. You're trying to cover it up, and you have almost sort of no control. And again, sort of reading through the texts, and I've been through all of the recommended texts by Ava in real detail. I've got a detailed understanding now of the sort of the physiology of the bladder. That was actually a much deeper conflict and a much bigger invasion of my territory. And so I was sort of thinking, is that time? And it didn't quite fit. So a few weeks ago, we were staying with some friends, and there was a really unpleasant conversation going on, which it was quite a racist conversation. It was everybody was talking, and I felt quite uncomfortable. I was in the back of a car, and I just couldn't wait to get out. And in the end, when we sort of pulled up, I just had to get out, find a toilet. And of course, the inevitable happened, which I now know was I needed to do a much larger and instant marking of my territory because that had been invaded so much. I was then sort of thinking, well, is this a different conflict? And quite often we can have two conflicts running exactly at the same time that are unrelated. I was sort of playing around with this idea. He doesn't know this part of the story yet because it's only just sort of starting to
Yeah, you're in the midst of the investigation. So I was like, come in
starting
because
to
it's seeing the flavor of it, right? It's like,
yeah.
how are you breaking it down, right? You find these little moments because it's hard sometimes to work on the big ones, right? And then you start going, well, how does this relate to that? Right? Keep going.
So I was finding that if I was in the garden, which was my time, my leisure time, enjoying whatever I was doing, and then there would be something really quite innocuous. Again, that was a little interruption um, of possibly an I should, but he didn't account for this massive gush of when I felt my territory being invaded. And um, I was going to a meeting earlier in the week, and I was in the car, and suddenly had to get out and go get into this meeting. And again, the inevitable happened. I was able to just sort of cover it up. But I'd realized that actually on a journey, instead of having to stop at the services, being in a car, and then having to make that walk, and quite often the toilets in the UK service stations are actually a long way from the parking, even if you're in the disabled parking, I didn't have control. And so again, there was this massive need for marking. And I was sort of thinking, there is something to do with the car here, which I was thinking this is separate from this sort of intrusion, these little wees. And so I was differentiating big wees and little wees. Sorry for the childish sort of descriptions here, but it's easier to differentiate. And thinking there is something different happening here. And so I went back a couple of mornings ago, and through the sort of training that I've had, it was very much a sort of, okay, so what does this remind me of? And I closed my eyes and I went back, and I would have been about 3 or 4 years old. I've just turned 60. I know I don't look it. Thank you, everybody. But so it was quite a few years ago. And I remember being in the car with my mum and saying, as a little boy, Mum, I need the toilet. Mum, I need the toilet. And saying, oh, just hold on. And she was telling me to control myself and to hold on. And there's only so long a little boy can hold on. And eventually I wet myself, and I was waiting for her to pull over and to allow me to get out to go for a wee properly. And I got told off for that. And so there was this pressure then to control myself. And if I don't control myself, I lose my mother's love. I've realized that actually that little voice in the back of my head, my inner monologue, is saying, Mum, I need to stop the car. I need to go for a wee. Mum, I need to stop the car and go for a wee. And I've been ignoring that and consistently ignoring that. And so often there will be that sort of little voice going on, my inner monologue saying, actually, I need to go for a wee. And I suppress it and I control it. And then eventually it gets to the stage of it's just too much. And I need a massive territory marking. And so my view of this sort of little wheeze, big wheeze thing, I don't think it's time, is my territory. And this was something that came up, and where they've all been talking about themes, that one of the sessions we did was actually, and it's very common with sort of the MS community, is this need to control, exactly as my mother was saying. And so every aspect of my life I've been controlling so that I could actually achieve my mother's love or whatever outcome I need to get my external validation. And that was exactly what I was doing in the back of the car. I was trying to
Mhm.
hold on. And again, when I was at my desk, I was trying to control what I was doing and then sort of suppress those little thoughts. And even I'd had a session that the other side of control is sort of the yin and yang, this extreme control was actually freedom. And there was a whole load of things I was doing just to try and screw up control. And I've realized that actually my screwing up of control is by having that prompt to wait is a way of moving me away from control into freedom. And it's getting back that balance in my life. And so the territorial conflict that I've got going on is actually not about time. It's actually about that balance between freedom. So freedom's over here and control is over here. And control had taken up so much of my life. And if it was a little bit of a balance shift, I could control it and my body would accept it. But if the balance became too big, my body was stepping in and saying, I need to take you away from your desk, to take you away from that controlling situation and put you into a different situation. And so that need to get up and go to the toilet, go to the bathroom, was actually just giving me freedom for a few seconds and just breaking that control. And so I've been sort of working on that. And last night, I was thinking, oh, well, of course, I've worked all of this out. That's easy. And I was sat on the sofa, and I thought, because I've worked all of this out, it'll be fine. And so I sat there watching the end of this program, and I thought, I'm determined not to put it on pause. I'm going to watch it anyway. In the end, it got too much. I staggered out, and I was at home. It didn't matter, but I didn't quite make the bathroom as elegantly as I wanted. Um, and then this morning it dawned on me, I was thinking, what's going on there? What was I doing wrong? And I thought, of course, I'm trying to control it. I'm control, control, control. And if I'd actually just sort of let up and brought the freedom of life together, that conflict wouldn't have existed. And so that need to mark territory then can disappear. So I'm sorry, it's a long rant for a 2-second question, but that's that's a journey which I've been going on
Yeah.
and trying to unpick my little detective story of why my bladder is actually, I think, actually helping me get me off the desk and stopping me being too serious and giving me freedom.
So in a sense, his all about control at some point, I don't know if it was during your job or, at some point, it became a dangerous thing or it became like this is too much, and that's when the body stepped in. And now anytime he goes into that controlling, his body again is going to step in, right? It's going to go, oh no, you don't do that, because that time it was way too much, right? And as he explained, as a little kid, he has childhood, he has moments with his mom, like control this, right? So he has behaviors around control and linked to the bladder, right? So it's like once you start doing this work, and it's like everything will start fitting in, right? And when it doesn't, it's like, okay, maybe my hypothesis, time. The timepiece didn't quite fit with my mother. So let me look at, until you start finding, oh, wait a minute, here it is, right? And what a great opportunity to learn a different behavior in life rather than trying to control everything, because the body's going, we did that once and it did not go well.
Yeah.
Which is like this client digging her heels. Her body's like, you did that whole year and it did not go well, right? And so it's asking for another behavior, another method.
Yeah. Angelica, you were asking if after all of this, have my bladder symptoms got any better? I would say it's a journey. And last night No, they weren't, because I made the same mistake and I repeated the same behavior. And it was afterwards, and it was actually this morning, it dawned on me because I was beating myself up thinking, oh, I ought to have this self-evaluation. I ought to have been better. This self-evaluation conflict, which then weakens the external sphincter, which is a striated muscle, which means you have less control. And so it didn't work last night, but I now understand the mechanism a bit better. And so I've had a series of meetings today, and what I'm working on is this self-evaluation. I'm not pushing myself under too much pressure. In the bladder, the external sphincter is a striated muscle, which is one you've possibly got some control over. And that's because I've been beating myself up for so many years, probably not as strong as it needs to be. So I'm not going to put myself under any pressure. So I'm going to do the sort of usual precautions that I was doing before. So I'll go for a pee before I sit down, so that I'm not testing myself, so I can allow that to heal. But also actually understanding that the mechanism of urination is the activation of the muscle of the bladder wall. It's the activation of the internal sphincter. They're all they're all out of our control because they're smooth muscles. We can't, with logical thought and control, we can't affect them. So it's a bit like opening the gates of the Aswan Dam and then thinking one little sphincter muscle is going to control it. It ain't. And so I'm not going to beat myself up about that because I've stacked the odds against me. So there's two healings going on. One is that sort of weakened, and then the other is just over working out this intrusion of my territory. And so I've been working on today. And actually, I know from the other work that I've done is how much more creative the subconscious is than ever the logical mind. And so instead of control, actually just bringing that creativity in and thinking, well, actually that bladder twinge is actually saying, just bring in the creativity side, bring in that creative energy. Don't try and control it, just let it run. And I find that that's actually switched off the bladder urge. And I've been playing around with it in lots of today, and it's been quite fun. And, I won't always get it right, but thinking, oh, actually, that I think is going to be my solution.
Yeah. So it's nice, it's being able to play without the pressure that it has to be this and it has to be that. And one of the things about the bladder that also throws people off is in the middle of the healing, the epicrisis, there can be a complete evacuation. It's like a complete release. So if you're like, oh, I'm totally relaxed, good, no pressure, what happened? Right. And I think I told the stories when I first started using this work, my clients weren't familiar with it. And so I had a client realized her boundaries with her dad. She would always allow her dad to swoop in, and, save her. But of course, he'd always do too much. And when she had a conversation of, Dad, I need to do things for myself, and I will ask you specifically when I need help. She really solved this boundary. For the next 2 days, she, right as she was waking up in the morning, she would go into the epicrisis. So she would wet her bed. And she was like, "Oh my gosh, it's worse. It's worse." And it's like, no, it's gonna do that. It's gonna release as it's getting to the end of the program. So expect to have a couple, to have the epicrisis. You need to get to that other
Thanks, Ava.
side of
I
that.
really look forward to that.
Yeah, so understand that's going to happen, and then you're like, woohoo! I'm at the end. I'm in phase B of healing. Yes, right? So good. Any questions to Gavin or to myself before we take our 7-minute break? Let me see if there's anything else I think Gavin was answering what's on the chat at the same time.
The pelvic floor thing, I think, is probably connected with strengthening the external urethral sphincter. And so that's why I'm thinking that it's a self-devaluation conflict. I th there's no reason why that won't strengthen through just saying, okay, fine. If I wet myself, I wet myself. It won't be the first time. It probably won't be the last. And I think there's probably not a person on the planet that hasn't done that. And these are circumstances beyond my control because they're all smooth muscles that I have no control over. And it's that sort of triggering from before. And so that bit can then heal itself. And that's why I'm taking these steps to go to the bathroom before. Don't drink, 2 pints of water before I'm going into a meeting. Just those sensible things so that I've avoided that self-devaluation. And if it happens, it happens.
In the bladder, so bladder, as Gavin said, is always going to be about territory, somebody encroaching, someone, it's like I remember I had a client whose bladder issue was going on because her mother would store her things in her room, right? It's like you're impinging on my territory. Bladder has two, as Gavin says, we have two different type of muscles, and we have smooth muscles and we have striated. But in this area, there's two different themes that could go on. Self-valuation. I'm beating myself up because I can't organize my stuff. I can't claim my territory. Or the motor conflict, which is around stuck, right? I want to do this, but I can't, right? Don't know. I want to, but I can't, you know. So it's figuring out which flavor you're dealing with. So it's giving you the hints, and as Gavin's doing, it's looking for your theories and then experimenting. If it's about time, let me check. If I do this, if I do that, do I create a change? Okay, no, it feels like it's about control and, over controlling. Okay, let me see what happens when I let that go. And again, it's playing with it and it's then figuring out, oh, I did it again, right? And I'll tell you guys a story also about that in my own, feet pain, how after 18 months, I'm like, did it again. Of course, we have certain ways of being and the body's just like, hello, feet pain, we're back, and it's about doing it less and less and less until, in 5 minutes, you're like, oh, I see what I'm doing. Off you go, right? And closing that down.
Well,